You've been lied to about American geography. While you think state lines are logical boundaries, the truth is most borders are the result of drunk surveyors, political mistakes, and pure incompetence. Here's what they hide: there are kitchens in one state with bedrooms in another, wars fought over 8-mile strips, and GPS systems that crash trying to locate you. But here's the kicker: some Americans found geographical cheat codes. Take that South Fulton guy living in 2 states simultaneously, gaming taxes like a pro, or Delaware residents who invaded New Jersey and laugh at their tax savings. What's infuriating? These geographical curiosities aren't historical accidents, they're active loopholes some Americans exploit daily. The shocking part? These borders affect millions, yet most people don't know these geographical goldmines exist. Well, you're about to discover 5 bizarre boundaries that prove American geography is stranger and more exploitable than anyone told you. After this, you'll never see maps the same way again. Imagine looking at a map of the United States and encountering a border that snakes like a drunken snake between Tennessee and Kentucky. Well, this geographical oddity follows the winding path of the Tennessee River, creating one of the most fascinating curiosities in American geography. What's really mind-blowing is that this decision, made centuries ago, still confuses GPS and navigation apps to this day. The irregular line challenges our understanding of how borders should function. Actually, there are small communities that literally don't know if they belong to Tennessee or Kentucky. The geographical curiosities of this region have real, practical implications on people's daily lives. Take, for instance, the city of South Fulton, where a family can technically live in 2 different states depending on which room of the house they're in. Taxes, laws, and emergency services vary drastically from one side of the street to the other. Gosh, imagine explaining that to the pizza delivery driver when he asks for your address. Properties have switched states 3 or 4 times in history without the owners even moving. Well, you can imagine the bureaucratic paperwork that caused. But here's where it gets really interesting: this border exists because colonizers used natural features like rivers to define territories. However, rivers have this inconvenient tendency to change course over time, especially the temperamental Tennessee River. The curiosities of this region defy our conventional logic about geography and maps. And this is just one of many bizarre borders that reveal how history and nature conspire to create true geographical anomalies. Actually, each of these oddities has its own surprising history waiting to be discovered. Picture this: you're driving through West Virginia, and suddenly you find yourself in Maryland, without crossing a bridge or passing any obvious landmark. Well, welcome to the surreal world of Jefferson County and its geographical curiosities that defy all cartographic logic. Actually, there are small portions of Maryland that are completely surrounded by West Virginia, creating true enclaves that seem to have been forgotten by conventional maps. What's absolutely fascinating is that these geographical anomalies exist due to border disputes dating back to the 18th century. Gosh, imagine the confusion of the first settlers trying to figure out exactly where they lived. The curiosities of this region go far beyond simple lines on a map; they directly affect people's lives. Take, for example, families who have to pass through 2 different states just to get to the nearest supermarket. Zip codes become a real mess, with some houses receiving mail from Maryland while their neighbors across the fence technically belong to West Virginia. But here's the kicker: taxes, the school system, and even alcohol laws can vary drastically by just a few meters. Actually, there's a famous property where the pool is in Maryland, but the main house is in West Virginia. However, these bizarre borders didn't happen by chance; they are the result of centuries of territorial disputes and complex political decisions. Well, when Maryland was originally established, geographical measurements were made with primitive and often inaccurate instruments. The curiosities of this area include historical landmarks that were placed in the wrong spot, rivers that changed course, and even cartographic errors that became permanent. What's really mind-boggling is that solving these anomalies today would be more complicated than simply leaving them as they are. And speaking of geographical complications, wait until you hear about the next border that challenges our understanding of how maps should work. Get ready to have your mind blown. There's a part of Delaware that technically should belong to New Jersey, but through one of the most bizarre geographical curiosities in America, it remains Delaware's territory to this day. Well, it all started with a 12-mile circle drawn around the city of Newcastle, Delaware, in 1701. What's absolutely crazy is that when this circle was drawn, no one imagined it would create a small peninsula that invades New Jersey like a lost slice of pizza on the map. Actually, this geographical anomaly is so strange that even Google Maps sometimes gets confused about which state you're visiting. The result? One of the most peculiar and contested borders on the east coast of America. The curiosities of this region directly affect residents living on Delaware's invading peninsula. Take, for instance, people who live just 5 minutes from New Jersey but need to drive nearly an hour to reach their own state's capital, Dover. But here's where it gets really interesting. Delaware's taxes are significantly lower, so many New Jerseyans try to establish residency in this small area to escape the high taxes of their home state. Gosh, imagine the irony of living in a geographical invasion just to save money. Actually, there are businesses that literally moved their official addresses to this peninsula just to take advantage of Delaware's tax benefits. However, this crazy border isn't the result of a modern cartographic mistake, it's the product of one of the most accurate measurements of the colonial era. Well, when William Penn was granted the land to establish Delaware, he insisted on having access to the sea, and this 12-mile circle ensured exactly that. What's fascinating is that this measurement was so precise that it is still considered one of the most accurate territorial markings of colonial America. The geographical curiosities of this area include original stone markers that still exist, some hidden in private backyards. But wait, if you think this situation is complicated, get ready to discover a border that was meant to be perfectly straight but ended up being anything but. Here's something that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about geography. The border between Utah and Colorado was supposed to be a perfectly straight line, but in reality, it zigzags like a lightning bolt drawn by an energetic child. Well, when 19th-century surveyors were tasked with creating this straight border, they didn't count on impossible mountainous terrain, brutal snowstorms, and surveying tools that were primitive at best. What's absolutely mind-blowing is that this straight line has over 200 small deviations and curves, creating one of the most embarrassing geographical curiosities in American history. Actually, if you fly over the region, you can literally see where the surveyors stopped to rest, started again in the wrong place, and created small stairways on the map. The curiosities of this crazy border go far beyond simple measurement errors. They created practical problems that persist to this day. Take, for example, farmers who discovered their fields technically lay in 2 different states, complicating everything from taxes to agricultural regulations. But here's the kicker, there's a famous property where the main house is in Utah, but the barn is in Colorado, and this isn't by the owner's choice. Gosh, imagine trying to explain that to the IRS during an audit. Actually, some small communities are so confused about their location that they use zip codes from both states alternately, depending on which postal service arrives first. However, this defective border became a permanent part of American geography because correcting it would be more expensive and complicated than leaving it as it is. Well, when the errors were discovered decades later, properties had already been sold, cities established, and contracts signed based on the wrong border. What's really fascinating is that this imperfect line perfectly represents human ambition versus the reality of the wild nature of the American West. The geographical curiosities of this region include mislocated stone markers that still serve as official landmarks. But prepare yourself, if you think surveying mistakes are problematic, wait until you discover a border that literally caused a war between 2 American states. Brace yourself for one of the most absurd geographical curiosities in American history. A war fought between Ohio and Michigan over a strip of land just 8 miles wide that included the prosperous city of Toledo. Well, in 1835, these two states literally mobilized their militias and prepared for battle due to poorly defined borders dating back to colonial times. What's absolutely incredible is that this territorial dispute almost resulted in bloodshed between Americans, all because of lines on a map that no one had properly measured. Actually, the only official casualty of this war was a Michigan legislator who was stabbed with a bayonet, but survived to tell the tale. Gosh, imagine explaining to your grandkids that you almost died fighting for geography. The curiosities of this war reveal how seemingly simple borders can have huge consequences in real life. Take, for instance, Toledo, which at the time was considered an economic jewel due to its strategic location on the Great Lakes and the future Erie Canal. But here's where it gets really interesting. Michigan ended up losing Toledo, but as compensation, it received the Upper Peninsula, a region that everyone considered wild and worthless. However, this consolation turned out to be one of the greatest gifts in American history, as the region was filled with iron ore, copper, and timber that were worth hundreds of times more than Toledo. Actually, Michigan literally won the geographical lottery without even knowing it. Well, this bizarre dispute was resolved by the U.S. Congress, which basically said, "Stop this nonsense and accept this deal." What's fascinating is that the geographical curiosities of this region still influence sports rivalries, local politics, and even jokes between the two states. The bottom line is that borders that seem like just lines on a map can determine the fate of millions of people and trillions of dollars in natural resources. The curiosities of this war include historical landmarks that still exist, official documents declaring hostilities, and even military medals awarded to veterans who never fired a shot. But here's the real kicker: this seemingly crazy story is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to American borders that defy all geographical logic. So there you have it, 5 borders that prove American geography is pure chaos. But here's the question: what are you gonna do with this knowledge? Are you just gonna scroll past, or actually research these geographical loopholes? Right now, people in these boundary anomalies are saving thousands by exploiting these geographical curiosities. What's stopping you from investigating these opportunities? Pick one of these borders and research it tonight. Stop being passive and start acting on knowledge. If this blew your mind, smash that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more hidden curiosities about American geography.